All right, so thank you all for waiting. My name is Fahel Smayt. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Middle East Institute here at NUS, and it's our great privilege and honor to have with us today Dr. Tariq Ramadan, who I believe probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but of course I'm going to give one anyway. Dr. Ramadan comes to us as a professor of Islamic Studies at Oxford University. He's also a visiting professor at Qatar University and Doshisha University in Japan. He speaks widely, as you're probably all aware, on issues of Islamic theology, philosophy, Muslims in the West, ethics, economics, human rights, etc. He's a longtime proponent of interfaith and intercommunity dialogue and has been nominated as one of the top 100 intellectuals at least twice, I believe, by Time magazine and by Foreign Policy magazine as well. He's the author of at least 15 books. And the latest book is The Arab Awakening, Islam in the New Middle East, which is going to be the sort of the context for the discussion today. Just to provide just a little primer about the book. For those of you who have been sort of watching the headlines and want to have a better understanding of the multiple factors that are involved in the Arab uprisings, this is a great book to sort of give you a survey of many of the debates and the issues that are at stake. Certainly he covers issues of economics, politics, society and religion. He provides sort of both an example of how things have come to be and the historical precursors that led to the events. He talks about the role of Western forces in the uprisings, but without resorting to pedantic descriptions of victimization that often come up in terms of how the role of the West is manipulated places in the Middle East. And importantly, I think he highlights sort of the futility of debating sort of the political developments in terms of, on one hand, sort of traditional Islam, and on the other hand, a modern secularism as two opposing forces. I think he complicates this notion. And he ultimately asks what kind of role Islam can play as an emancipatory factor as the Middle East moves forward and tries to find its own way to reconstitute the political and social orders of the region. And of course, all of this is part of a larger project of Dr. Ramadan's, in which he is examining and complicating and in some ways clarifying the complex integration between interacting cultures, geographies, ideas, and politics in our present time. So with that, if you'll all please join me in welcoming Dr. Ramadan.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Fahid, for this introduction. I want to thank the Middle East Institute for this invitation this afternoon here and giving me the opportunity to talk about, in fact, the substance of the last book that was published a few months ago and, in the UK about what is happening in MENA, in the Middle East, and in the North African countries, and to try to understand what is happening, trying at the same time to ask the right questions and to think about what could be the next steps in the region, and in which way, when we talk about the evolution in the region and the process of democratization and uprisings and changes in the region, what could be said, what could be hoped, and in which way we, from where we are, we also have to be involved in the discussion. So I think that it could be very important and useful for us to have a long question and answer session, so I will try to stick to my time and to give you the opportunity to just comment, criticize, or ask questions. Let me just start with 3 points in as an introduction and things that are, in fact, the prerequisites to start the discussion. When things started in Tunisia 1.5 years ago, I was, of course, as many of the people who are working and are interested in the Middle East, studying what was happening before, following the events, following uprisings in Tunisia, people protesting and not being happy, the economic situation, the rise of the bread price and the basic needs for people. The situation in both countries was economically already quite fragile and in trouble. And many people, for example, talking about Egypt, was saying something is going to happen, the situation is very bad. In Tunisia, we had trade unions protesting, demonstrating against the regime, and it was known, and not only a few months before, but the years before, that even the American administration was talking to opposition, talking to people, and things were moving. And by the way, when people are saying now that the American administration started to talk to the Muslim Brotherhood just after what happened, it's an ignorance about the way the American administration have been dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood over the last 40 years. It's not new that they were trying to be in touch. If it was not in Egypt, it was in other countries, it was in Jordan, it was in Qatar over the last few years. This is known by all the people who are following, not because they were controlling, but they needed to know who could be the main opposition forces within the country. Now, I think that straight when things started, we got some positive wording in the way this was described by speaking about an Arab Spring and revolutions. And from the very beginning, I was very cautious with words because words matter, that we have to be very cautious. And it was taken from the Eastern European experience, what happened with Milosevic and all, you know, the revolutions that were experience over there, and saying, oh, it's exactly the same. We have people, in fact, now taking into the streets and resisting and protesting, and it's a genuine movement coming from the streets. And then I started to question the terminology, and by questioning the terminology, questioning our interpretations of what was happening over there. It was not as surprising as this. Many things were known before, and still I don't speak today about revolutions, and I don't see the spring yet. So these are words of caution about the way we are talking about it, because the way very often the people were emotionally driven by saying it's happening, it's great, it's good, and even in the West, the way it was perceived, but not only there, by being cautious with the words I was using, I was criticized by Arabs and people in Tunisia, in Egypt, saying, you don't trust the Arabs. You always think, and this is why you are cautious, you always think that we are not able to make it. I was never saying this. I don't think that the Arabs are not able to make it, but to think that they were the only one to make it, or to make it the way it was described, was problematic in my understanding of what was happening. So these are questions that are coming through the terminology. Now, why? Why this caution, and why starting with this? Because when I started writing the book, I started to study what we knew before, and in which, for example, things which were not known and not said and not publicized were in fact known by the American administration, by the European countries, and even by the dictators themselves. Remember that in 2008, people coming back from training sessions in the United States of America, financed by the Freedom House, by the Albert Einstein Institutes, were arrested in Cairo. And they were put in jail straight after they came back from training session. These training sessions were about, you know, using internet and working on mobilizing non-violent demonstration. This was known in 2008. in 2008, the American ambassador is sending a message to the State Department saying that young people are now mobilizing forces to get rid of the dictator before September 2011. This was in 2008, so 3 years before what happened. And I think that we are not serious ourselves by thinking that George W. Bush was not a so intelligent president. He wasn't so intelligent, but we are sometimes confusing the man with the administration and the system. He should have been taken seriously when in 2003 he was talking about democratizing the Middle East and this vision that something should be done. He was explaining what was happening in Iraq through a process that the Middle East should change, and not to change because the American administration cares about democracy in the Arab world. If this would be the case, we would start with the Saudi regime, but because there are interests at stake and there are things to be discussed here. So the point for me is when we come back to what was happening before, we have over the last 5 years, 2004, 2005, 2007, 2008, and then 2010, people who were in fact coming from the region in North African countries, in the Middle East, who were trained by institutions, not only institutions in the States, by the way, you have institutions and organizations, and one of the most important organizations, and I met the chairman of this organization. He was very much involved in everything that had happened against Milosevic in Serbia. Srđan Popovic, he was leading Outport resistance, and then he organized an institution and he set an organization, Canvas. And Canvas was in charge of training cyber dissidents and bloggers for years in something which became a philosophy of nonviolent demonstrations. 50 points, you have now booklets, it's a philosophy, it's really something which is thought in a way which is quite interesting, is in which way we can use the social networks, in which way we can use the internet to connect the people and to spread 3 things: planification, discipline, and nonviolent demonstrations. So this is known. And by the way, when I met him, say, is it true that you were trained by someone who was in the American army before? He said, yes, that's true, but he retired before. Okay, that's fine. So it's as if there is no connection. And then you go and you carry on searching, and you just discover that in September 2011, so before things started, you had the first international network of Middle Eastern bloggers that was set in Budapest. Who was financing it? Google, with whom the institutions I was talking about, Albert Einstein Institute. So my point here is to say, anyone who is telling you nobody knew about training people and using internet and the way it was used was not saying the truth. Of course, it was known. Now, does it mean, and this is the point of the book, does it mean that everything was under control? That's not true. I think that no one was expecting the mobilization of the people in Syria the way they were courageous, and they went. And for 8 months, remember, the American administration was saying, we want Bashar al-Assad to reform the regime from within. They didn't want him to leave for 8 months because they were not sure of the opposition. And up to now, no one is clear about who are the opponents and who is having the upper hand on the opposition. Mainly today, it's still the Islamists, and among them, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Syrian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood are very active. And the point is that the way it is happening now in Syria is problematic because the opposition is divided. So my main point here is to say it might be that the way it was coming and understood and translated is much more complicated than this. And then you come to facts and you discover things that were quite interesting. Just to tell you something starting with, when I was asking the personal advisor of Nicolas Sarkozy, I had a TV program with him. This was more than 1 year ago. And I was asking him, why were you so much out of the picture in Tunisia? Because this is your country. In fact, you were controlling and supporting Ben Ali. He said something very quick happened. He didn't want to talk about this. I say, and what about Egypt? He didn't want to talk about Tunisia. And now we know a bit more. In the French TV, French newspapers, we got some information. These were confirmed afterward in the United States of America, in which way the American administration was involved in the departure of Ben Ali, with Petraeus, who now is leading the CIA, and the foreign minister, the Tunisian foreign minister, and the army commandment in Tunisia. In 2 days, they decided to get rid of him by pushing him to fall into a trap, telling him you are going back, you are leaving the country and you will come back after the people are going to settle. In fact, they decided to send him outside. And as I'm always repeating, if you think that a dictator could end up in Riyadh without the acceptance of Washington, once again, you are not understanding the relationship between the Saudis and the United States of America on this. He wanted first to go to France. It would have been a problem for the US if he had to be in France. So he was sent there, and now this is where he is. This is one thing which is interesting, and the personal advisors to Sarkozy telling me about Egypt, and think about it now. He told me this more than 1.5 years ago. He told me, in Egypt, it's not a revolution, it's a military coup d'etat. So knowing from within that things that were happening were not as clear as people are demonstrating and they are getting rid. Now we understand that from behind the scene, the only force in Egypt which never lost control of the situation are the military, up to now. And at the end, they gave power to the Muslim Brotherhood by stripping from his power all authority, or giving him authority or symbolic authority with no power. At the end of the day, just 2 days before they gave us the results, they were telling us it might be that we have to come back to elections in 6 or 8 months when the parliament is going to be re-elected. What does it mean? It means that he's here with no power. But it gave the impression in the streets that something was changing. And this is another point for me which is very important. I'm not talking about political revolution or social revolution. I'm talking about intellectual revolution and a cultural shift. It's clear today that something has changed in the Middle East, in all these countries, where the people are now having the feeling that something could happen, that they can get rid of dictators by protesting in non-violent way. This is the main benefit of the whole process. This is the way I see it. I see that something has changed in the mentalities, in the mindsets of the people, and they can be positive and demonstrate. Now, does it mean that on the ground with facts, what we are seeing now is the spring we are talking about? I'm not buying this at all. So I said in the book, and this is a section of the book, I'm cautiously optimistic. And cautious, much more than optimistic today. To tell you the truth, just trying to understand what is happening. So these are things that we knew before, and we have to take this into consideration. And not to, you know, many people, they say, when you start with this, say, oh, conspiracy theory, be careful. I'm saying, no, I'm not talking about conspiracy theory only. I'm saying it's a balanced way, but to avoid talking about what was known and understanding that sometimes it happened in history. You just have to read and to study history, that very often, you know, colonizing forces or US administration or the Russian administration were sometimes from behind the scene playing with what we thought were, you know, very positive things. We should not be naive. And anyone who is telling you, oh, there is no conspiracy, you know, it's the new word that, the dirty word you should not use, because it means that your mind is sick. And I'm repeating, not to believe in conspiracy is a conspiracy in itself. So we have to be cautious with politics. Anything could happen, and we can play with this. And you then look at the whole thing and ask, you know, when it comes to people, it's true that there was something like a domino effect. That's true that the people in Egypt started to demonstrate with this courage because it happened in Tunisia and they were able to. That's true. There was something which is the power of this resistance. That's true. Now, on the political side of the equation, it's much more a chess game. The way it was played, the way, for example, we have, when we study this, go case per case. Tunisia is not Egypt. Egypt is not Yemen. Yemen is not Syria. Syria is not Bahrain. And you will see that we have multiple dimensions and factors that we have to take into account. Of course, the alternative media and internet, but we cannot talk about what happened there without coming to the central role of Al Jazeera as a media that was covering in one way Tunisia and Egypt, supporting and completely forgetting and neglecting what happened in Bahrain. Even the Qatari forces were supporting through the Saudis, the government there, because it's as if democracy for Egypt is good, democracy for Bahrain is less good. Because in fact, it has also an impact on them and on the Saudis. So this reality of, oh, it came like this and all the people in Bahrain, it has nothing to do with Shia against Sunni, as it was afterward translated as, you know, it's an intra-religious conflict. It has to do also with Sunni people, Shia people coming together against the government and asking for more freedom in Bahrain. But this was not translated like this in the media. So the way it was translated depend from the beginning on geostrategic and economic and political interests. And we need to get that right to understand that the way the media were covering, the way it was translated to us, it's also part of something which is the chess game, which is not the domino effect that we had. Now, having said this, it's a long introduction to make it clear that I wanted to study what happened before, wanted to be very cautious with words, very cautious with this optimism that everything is going, you know, towards the right direction. And even, you know, I was following every week on my website. If you go back to the website, you will see that every week I was trying to write a paper and trying to follow. And I was saying it might be that at the end of the day, Tunisia is the good example hiding, or the success, and now I'm less convinced that it's already a success, but it might be that this is the success which is hiding the failures of so many others. So we're using revolution in a way, and then what is happening behind. Now look, and this was, you know, when I wrote this, it was almost 1 year ago. Look at what is the spring now. Where is it happening? Is it happening in a way where we could be happy? Even in Tunisia today, there are new forces that are very problematic. And there is something that is very important in the future of the Middle East. It's the Salafi equation that it's coming now in the countries. And it's coming in, so the Shia-Sunni divide, and within the Sunni tradition, the presence of new trends that were yesterday not at all involved in politics, and now they are only involved in politics. The Salafi yesterday, they were saying no politics. Democracy is not for us. Democracy is kufr. Democracy is haram, so meaning it's illegal, it's un-Islamic. And now, not only they say this in theory, but in practice, they are very much involved in the political discussion. And they are putting the stability in Tunisia at risk, and then they are very active in Egypt, and we don't always understand what is happening. So now, when we talk about this and we understand the whole picture, my take on this is the starting point is to understand it's very complex, and we have to look at it from different angles and getting a comprehensive understanding, or at least a comprehensive picture of the whole thing. Now, if I come to the first part of my talk and trying to come to something which is through the complexity, deconstructing the complexity, and to try to put things in a way that is helping us to have a better understanding. First, once again, when it started in Tunisia and then in Egypt, it's clear that there were forces from within that were already working against the dictators. And that the Islamists, for example, why they were so quick to come at the forefront, it was they had a historical credibility as opponents to the systems, to the dictators. And this is something which is quite clear. So to say something from the beginning, the success of these uprisings came, in fact, because there were no political force leading them. It was mainly people protesting and being able to go beyond the political ideology or the political affiliations. It was not the secularist, it was not the Islamist, it was not a specific political party. This was crossing the board, people coming from all the political horizons saying no. So the uniting force that helped the success was because the people were talking and mobilizing beyond their specific affiliation. So this was the strength of the movement and at the same time its weakness. Why? Because just after they get rid of the dictator, the project was not there. And this is why you can see that all the young who were, you know, the 6th April movement in Egypt, all these young people in Tunisia, they were completely lost. And when the elections came, they were getting 2%, 3%, not more. Why? Because they were able to mobilize against, but there were no vision about what we can get beyond the dictators. So the strength of the movement was at the same time the weakness of the movement and no real leadership. And when, for example, political parties tried to mobilize the people, for example, and to take, you know, advantage of the situation, remember in Algeria during the first weeks, they failed. Why? Because first, because Algeria had a very specific history with violence over the last 15 years, but more importantly, these were political parties leading and trying to demonstrate, and the people didn't follow. So they followed the movement because there were no specific leadership, and then just after the fall of the dictators, it was very difficult to see what was going to happen. It was true within as it was true for us outside, trying to understand the dynamic and who was leading. As I was saying, things were, you know, the training of the people who started, we have to get it right to understand the role of the bloggers and the cyber dissidents, but not overestimating what they did. It's clear that if it worked, it was because the people didn't want the dictators, that there is objective factors that they were using against the dictators. It's not only something which is completely built out of nothing. There was, you know, there were people working against the dictators, and there were resistances, there were people in the opposition. All this is true. The point is to use the values that were unifying values. Act against corruption, autocratic systems, freedom, and justice. Why? Because Muhammad Bouazizi, when he immolated himself, it was something which was a strong movement. There is no respect and there is no food. We are starving and the system is denying us our dignity. So these are objective factors, and it's on this that the whole system, the whole dynamic of this movement started. Having said that now, and beyond our understanding of this, two things have to be said. The first is our reading of the events very often within the countries, but also outside. And when I was talking to some Tunisian people, they were always stressing on the fact that we in the West, or the people in the West, don't understand the dynamic, what happened within the society, our quest for freedom and justice. And they were stressing on something which was mainly the political factor, that we were facing a dictator. And I think that one of the dimensions that is missing in all our discussion, nationally, regionally, and internationally, is the economic factors. The economic factors, for me, are much more important than any political reality. Of course, they were facing dictators. That's clear, and they wanted freedom. But the dynamic, what happened, the driving force are for me much more economic factors, socio-economic factors and economic factors. Internally, of course, within the society, the socio-economic factors, but in the region, the economic factors, I will come to this, are critical for us to understand what was happening. So from the very beginning, I think that we need to get a more comprehensive approach of this. Now, as I was saying, it's quite clear that Tunisia and the reality of what happened, why, for example, very quickly Nahda was the driving force after, because the absence of leadership before made the more organized opposition and the more credible opposition leading the movement afterward. And it's clear that in the reality of Tunisia, the credibility was for Nahda. They were tortured, in exile, and they came back very well organized on the ground. And it's exactly the same thing with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Why they were the driving force is something which is quite interesting if you look at the reality over the last 20 years, knowing, for example, that the Muslim Brotherhood were not at all supporting the movement till the 24th of January. It's the young generation of Muslim brothers who pushed the old generation to be in the streets. They didn't want first to be involved because this is the way they were pragmatic. They didn't know what was going to happen, so they were very cautious. And the Muslim Brotherhood scattered. There was an implosion from within, 5 different trends. People saying we have to go, others saying we don't have to go, others saying we have to talk to the military even, because the military was critical in Egypt. There is no way to deal with power if you don't deal with the military. Not only political power. You should know that 35 to 40% of the big sectors of the economy in Egypt are under the authority of the army. The army, it's an economic force in Egypt. It's not only a political force. It's something which has to do with the other side of the story that we have now in the country. So when you look at all this situation and you get it, you understand that yes, the Muslim Brotherhood just came afterward, and on the 25th they started to be and to try to reconnect with the people. And they succeeded not only because they were the more organized, because of this historical credibility they were against the power. And something happened which is now happening in Tunisia and coming quite late, and something happened, remember, just before, after the movement, over in 6 months, a shift in the reality in Egypt. And this is why we need to take this case per case and to try to understand what is happening in every country. The Nahda movement was the driving force just after, because they were the more organized and also having this historical credibility. In Egypt, it started afterward. We had the same presence of the Muslim Brotherhood, but the movement was also present, and it changed in 8 months. And these are the Salafi. The Salafi, 8 months before, they were saying democracy is not Islamic, it's kufr, and we are not going to be involved. And in 8 months they changed, and they were involved, and they got 24% with the election. Surprising. From saying it's wrong to saying it's right, and we are involved and getting 24%. What we got afterwards by a RAND Corporation report is they were very much supported financially from abroad. 2 main countries, and not the states, we are told, but organizations, Salafi organizations, put up to $80 million supporting the Salafi. First in Egypt and now in Tunisia. The 2 countries, the Saudi and the Qatari organizations. And it's quite interesting to understand that Al Jazeera was very much supportive of the uprisings and pushing in Egypt, also connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in talks that were normal and official, and then at the same time pushing the Salafi through organizations. And many people said after the election in Egypt, we had 60% for the Islamists. This was the wrong reading of it. In fact, it was 20 against the 40 to put the Muslim Brotherhood between the Salafi and the army. And this is exactly what happened. At the end, remember something which is quite interesting. The Salafi are supposed to be very conservative. And when the election came and their candidate was removed from the list, if you remember, their candidate was removed, they went to support not the more conservative, the Muslim Brotherhood, but Abdel Mun'im Abul Futuh, the more liberal, who left the Muslim Brotherhood and was running on his own. And they supported him. Why? If you are consistent with your ideology, you should support the more conservative. So they supported the one who was against the Muslim Brotherhood, and the fight was clear. You should know that, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood asked Abdel Mun'im Abul Futuh to join them now in the new step, and he refused. So there is something which is quite interesting to see the Salafi presence playing against the Islamists. And this is exactly what they are doing in Tunisia. While from where we were in outside the countries, we understood they are all the same. And in fact, the Salafi are also supported by petromonarchies that are not far from connections with the West and the state administration. And once again, as I'm always saying, the Western countries have no problem with Islamism as long as they are capitalists. And they are ready to put the money in our banks in the West. So as long as you are neoliberal on the economic and not so liberal on democracy, you can say, no democracy, women cannot drive, but the money, we are liberal with money. So be tough with human beings and liberal with money, it works. We need to get this, the picture here, which was between Tunisia and Egypt, because these were the two pilot countries. And now, as I was saying, what happened in Bahrain was not at all covered the same way and protected, and still the government is there. The preemptive policy that was quite interesting in Morocco and in Jordan by the kings that were preemptively trying to open up more space to the Islamists. They did this with the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, and they gave them, I knew by one of the advisors of the Moroccan king, I knew the result of the election before the election. I knew that they were going to win. And they were not making it, you know, it was an open secret. Yes, it was good to have them as the prime minister and the Islamists. One trend, by the way, of the Islamists in Morocco, because it was a preemptive. It's putting them in office for two reasons. First, to open up and to say there is freedom here. And second, to put them in a test, which is your credibility now is going to be at risk while you are running the country. And by the way, it might be exactly the same in Egypt now, putting them in a situation where they have the authority without power and make them lose their credibility in the way they are dealing with power. So this is something that we can look at the whole picture. What I was saying in the case-per-case scenario is really then to stop on Syria and to try to understand, as I said, Syria was not expected that way. And they were not supported at the beginning. These uprisings were not supported by the West, and the people went in a very courageous way. So for 8 months we heard that they were expecting, and we were expecting Bashar al-Assad to change his regime from within. And the people said, no, we are going to go as far as we should to get rid of him. And at the same time, they started to work with the opposition. And by the way, if you look at what happened in Libya, you will see that this was what happened in a very quick way, getting the people from the opposition. You remember the National Transitory Council, people coming together, people were asking, You know, we had even a new foreign French minister, Bernard-Henri Lévy, who went in Libya, organized the opposition, asked Sarkozy to come. And the deal was clear between the American administration and the French administration. It was impossible for Barack Obama to be involved in Libya the way he was involved in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So for France, it was a way to get a kind of leadership, but it was quite clear that the Americans were already in Libya, and this is known. If you look at what happened just after they got rid of Gaddafi, the presence of people who were in the States who are now in Libya, and the way the economic sector is under now the supervision of 4 main foreign countries, the United States, Britain, the British, the French, and Qatar. And now Turkey, by the way, is the 5th one that are now, and they are now controlling the economic sector in the way, for example, even a French newspaper, Libération, was saying there is a deal. This was before Gaddafi was killed, between the National Council, or Transitory Council, and the French government, that 35% of the oil is going to be exported to France. Now we are at 33%. So the deal is almost done. This is what we got before. So it's confirmed now with facts and figures that are confirming the fact that there was a deal. And when I was in this program, I was talking to the personal advisor to Sarkozy and say, tell me, why did you go to support the Libyan people? You care really about the Libyan? Yes, we care. And you have to understand, Tariq Ramadan, that sometimes people care about the blood of the Arabs. I say, okay, it took you time just to care about the Libyan people. What about the Palestinians who were asking you exactly the same, by the way? Remember this no-flight zone that they were asking for Gaza? They were asking the same. So you did it in Libya, and you used the UN resolution to enter. And this is why the Russian and the Chinese, they are not happy with what you did in Libya, because they lost their interest. The economic interests were lost by China and by the Russian administration, because you used the UN resolution to enter and to take over. So now they don't want you to do the same in Syria. But this came later. And this is where, for example, you can see that to tell us that all of a sudden we care about democracy and we care about the dignity of the people. Mainly Libya was critical in all the region. And we now know more about the critical role of Libya and oil in the region with Mali, northern Mali, and Niger. The resources there are tremendous. It seems even that the oil resource in this region are more than in Libya even. And this is a place, this is a region to be under control in the coming years. I think that we can see this, and which is very strange is now even the Mali leaders are asking the foreign forces to come and to enter to stop the Salafi radicals that are there. So there is a game that we have to understand, and this has nothing to do with political concerns. It has to do with economic and geostrategic concerns. Then we have to keep this in mind in anything that is happening. So if you look at all this, you understand it's a chess game. It has nothing to do with a movement, the spring, and celebrate the spring, happy new democracy. It's not this. It's not happening. It's not happening with this optimism that we have. And as I was telling you, my take on the last country that I wanted to, I started to talk about, and I want to end with this, is Syria. My take today is the situation is so complex in Syria that it might be that there is an agreement not to get an agreement about the Syrian situation. And this state of trouble in the region is helping many forces to sell weapons, to play on something which is going one of the main challenges for the Arabs and the Muslims in the coming years, the divide between Shia and Sunni. Because it plays very well. You can see even never before I got so much insults on my website and messages telling me, how come could you support the resistance in Syria? In fact, you support the resistance because you are a Sunni Muslim scholar. And as you are a Sunni, you support the resistance. And now it's the Shia people are supporting Bashar because he is against the West. And the West is supporting the petromonarchies, Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, it's a Sunni country. And the Sunni country asked the United States of America to cut the head of the snake, meaning Iran. And Iran, why? Because they are Shia. So the division here, it's something that is going to be very, very critical. And you know, in the past, what was unifying the Shia and the Sunni in the region was the resistance to Israel. And now it's the opposite that is happening. Why? Because over the last 7 years, the people who are resisting the more, and they are very attractive towards Muslims and Arabs, are the Shia. Iran, Lebanon are the countries that are more resisting. The only one who changed the picture was Erdogan. In one symbolic act, he stood up in Davos saying what you are doing in Gaza is not acceptable. He got a credibility that is just unbelievable. When he went to Egypt, he is the one who stood up against, in front of Shimon Peres in Davos. And then he sent the flotilla, remember, and people were killed and say, we are not going to talk to you again if you don't apologize. This is the stand he took against Israel. And this is why he has a credibility among the Arabs, which is he's the only one from the Sunni side that is having something to compete with the Shia in the way they are resisting Israel in the region. And we need to get this and to take this into account in all the dimensions, because the Middle East, without the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you don't put it somewhere in the way you understand the forces and the power struggle, you don't get it right. So you can see out of my discussion here how complex it is and in which way all these dimensions are playing. So I'm just trying to come back to the facts, to try to understand and to get a comprehensive approach. And having said that, let me come to the last 2 points before my conclusion that I wanted to make. It's having all this in mind, it's important to say, okay, why? These, for example, in which way the American administration, the European countries, the West, so to speak, who were supporting Mubarak for years, decades. They were supporting Ben Ali. Ben Ali was nothing without the French support and nothing without the American support. And you should know how much the Americans were involved in Tunisia and how much they were and still are involved in Egypt. And the relationship they had with Bashar al-Assad, and also the way that you remember just before he was killed, over the last 1.5 years before he was killed, Gaddafi, how he came back to within the international community, respected. He was received in Paris. He was talking to everyone, and then he was killed. And now we have a situation. Why then? They were supporting the dictators, they were their allies, and then they changed. And this is where it's very important to get the other side of the story. Many people say, oh, they had no benefit in stopping their support to Mubarak, and this is why the Americans and the West would have supported the dictators. In fact, as I was telling you, it was known that these were, at the end, the regimes, Mubarak regime and Ben Ali regimes were old, sick, and at the end of the cycle. And it was very important for the Western administration, European and American, to change the way they were dealing with the region for mainly 2 reasons. And the first reason is an economic reason. It's the revealed reality in the Middle East. Is the new actors are taking over the economic reality in the Middle East. BRIC, Brazil, India, Russia, and more importantly, China. China had multiplied by 8 its economic presence in the region. And this is something which is critical. China doesn't care about are you dealing with a democracy or a dictatorship. They care about markets. They don't have this rhetoric, you know, human rights. They don't care about this. And the point is that they were entering in Northern African countries in a way which was very powerful everywhere. In fact, today you cannot go in Africa without encountering the Chinese presence. Very effective, very efficient in the way they are dealing. And in fact, they were, in order to open the market and to be able to deal with new political realities, it was impossible for the Americans to carry on their policy in the region. It was impossible. They had to change with changing the regime and changing the people, dealing with new people in order to reach the markets. And to reach the markets means, for example, that we know that Gamal Mubarak, who was supposed to come after his father, started to direct his trading and his relationship, economic relationship towards China. Why? Because they were not asking him anything about corruption. He was opening the market, getting himself, taking over up to 45 to 50% of the economic big corporations and sector in Egypt. So the point here for us is to understand that something had to change for the United States of America and the West in the region, because they were shifting towards East. India, very efficient, and not only because they have economic relationship. You should know that it's millions of workers that are in the region coming from India. It's an interest here, and once again, this is an important reality with India. Brazil is a new actor. South African country. The South Africa, it's a very important new actor. Add to this now Turkey, which is coming. And you remember for years we were saying the survival of Turkey is to enter in the EU. And then they did exactly the opposite. You don't want us in the EU? We'll show you what we can do with the East. And today, in what we have as service coming from the EU, is that it might be that in the coming 10 years, EU will be more indeed of Turkey than Turkey of the EU. And in economic terms, they are doing better. So they are now shifting. The only country which is beyond the very troubling water in Europe today, that is surviving and leading Europe in economic terms is Germany. And you know why? Because Germany is the country which is investing and trading more with China today, much more than France. So this is something which is the shift towards East. It's a critical factor, and for the Western countries to keep the situation in the Middle East was not possible in economic terms. And there is another thing which is important. If there is a shift towards East, there is another problem which is directly connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The reality is that China, India, Russia, and all the new actors, South Africa. Remember South Africa? We are celebrating Nelson Mandela and saying that how much he's a great figure, but there is something that we miss in the way he was dealing with the region. When, for example, people from Hamas wanted to meet with him, he said, I don't have a problem with meeting with people from Hamas. They were elected, and people who are elected, I'm ready to meet with them. This discourse is something that is not welcome in the United States of America. It's not welcome in the West. And all the new actors, they have another relationship with the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. It's completely different. China in 2005 and then 2008 was not scared to invite delegates from Hamas. And when they were criticized by the United States of America and the administration, they say, these are elected people. We invite the people who are elected. Is it not democracy? Good point. Anyway, the point is that at the end of the day, we can see here that there is this shift towards East is playing at different levels. The economic level and the power struggle, the balance of power in the situation in the Middle East, it's important for us to consider. So why this change? There are reasons behind the change and supporting and following the changes. And in the Barack Obama's discourse that he made after the uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, half of this discourse was on economy. Remember, he was talking about we are going to put money, the World Bank, the IMF are going to be involved. This was very much his take on the whole issue. So here we have the new actors and we can understand what is happening. Having said that now, my last point in the whole discussion here about the new Middle East is to say, knowing this, does it mean that it's over, everything is under control? As I told you from the beginning, I think that the people in many countries, they showed that they are able to mobilize, to protest, and to change something. And this cultural shift, something changed in the Middle East, and for me today, it's still very much in the minds and not really in the facts and the realities. So I don't know if we are going towards unachieved or unfinished revolutions. What I see now is the capacity to resist and to do something. But having said this, there are challenges ahead, and I just want to mention them. You know, when I was in Tunisia and I was talking to Egyptian activists and people who are involved in the whole process, they were saying, oh, in the West, they don't understand us because they are reducing the whole discussion about you know, Islamists versus secularists. And in fact, they are right and they are wrong. Because in fact, it's not only the West which is doing this. In fact, they themselves, in Egypt and in Tunisia, they are reducing the political discussion between the secularists on one side and the Islamists. And it's a power struggle. And at the end, if you look at the rhetoric and the political rhetoric, it's very dangerous what is happening. Why? Because they are not talking about a political project. They don't have a vision. In fact, at the end of the day, what we see coming from the secularists is to say, we are the enlightened people, we are the progressive, you are backward, you come back to Islam, you want to confuse Islam with the religion and the state. And in fact, they get the legitimacy by being against the Islamists. And in the West, we celebrate this as if it's enough to be against the Islamists to be a Democrat. If this would have been the case, it would have been known. Because in fact, many of these people, the secularists, they were against the Islamists, but they were not Democrats. They were supporting the dictators, some of them, not all of them. And some, they were against the dictators, they were in trade unions, they were acting against the dictators, but yet, you can't have a political vision only by being against the Islamists. That's not a political project. On the other side, you come and you listen to the Islamists. They are criticizing the secularists by saying, you are westernized, you are under colonization, you are supporting the West, you are connected to the Americans, you are connected to the Europeans, and we are the guardian of the tradition. That's great, okay, but at the same time, it's very superficial. What is your political project? What are you bringing to the table? What kind of society do you want? It doesn't mean, it's not enough to say, to put Islamic to the state and to create an Islamic state to say, okay, we have the solution. So in fact, the political discourse ended up to be a mutual rejection and getting legitimacy by criticizing the other. Some cut from the people. Very often the secularists are sending their kids in American universities and outside the country. They are not connected. And the Islamists, they are here, but they don't come with a political project. So this polarization is the wrong equation. And if we want something to happen in the Middle East, in North African country, we have to break this and to come to ask the right questions. And the right questions, what I'm doing in the second part of the book, I'm trying to get rid of this polarization, say that's not going to work like this. If we want a change in the region, is not by playing the secularists against the Islamists. And by the way, the only people who got some votes, because there is a feeling in Tunisia and in Egypt that we have to go beyond this, are the people who are ready to work together. One, you know, I have lots of respect for Monsef Marzouki. Monsef Marzouki is a secularist. But he said it from the beginning. There is no way to change Tunisia if we don't deal with the Islamists. And some Islamists are ready to deal with us. So this new alliance of people who understand that the future is not to be against. And the secularists who said, we are not going to work with the Nahda, we don't want to be connected in any way to the Islamists, they got 2 to 3% of the votes, which is not the case of the two secularist parties that were the second and the third, that they were saying we have to go beyond this polarization. And us, outside the country, in the West or in Singapore, it's very important not to fall into the trap to reduce the political discourse in the Middle East to this polarization between Islamists and secularists. It's to come to a very a deeper understanding of what could be the political project. And my point is just to raise here or to bring to the fore three main fields that for me are essential for the future. The first one, no, four. The first, yes, it's really to come to this, the institutions. When, for example, we have now Islamists saying we don't want an Islamic state, we want a civil state with Islamic reference. I want to study this. What do you mean by this exactly? What is a civil state? Dawla madaniyya ذات مرجعية إسلامية, meaning we come to the Islamic reference. I want to understand this. What does it mean from an ethical viewpoint or from a political viewpoint? What does it fit in the... Because they are moving. And once again, I think that we can stop by saying all these people are very pragmatic. They play with words. They have, you know, as I heard this so many times, they have double talk. And we don't trust them. We don't buy their evolution. Remember what was said with Erdogan. By the way, maybe we will come back to Turkey. I don't have time to talk about it, but I wanted to say something that through your questions, maybe we'll come to Turkey because it's a good example. 10 years ago, Erdogan, the way we was dealing with him was, oh, he's an Islamist. He's going to create an Islamic state. Now, what he's saying, remember, in July last year, he went to Egypt and he told the people, don't be scared of a secular state. He himself working from within and doing something which is a project that the influence of Islamism is clear, but he's no longer talking about an Islamic state, but he's talking about Islamic reference. So that could be interesting to look at the way this state is going to work, the institutions, what kind of institutions, the way the parliament, the reference, for example, in Nahda decided at the end not to put Sharia in the constitution, saying we are not going to put this, understanding two things. Sharia could be misleading for the Islamists and misleading for the people who are against them. So there is a debate here that it's important in the way institutions are going to work. The second challenge is about education. And once again, instead in the West and from abroad to say, oh, we have a problem with the Arab countries and with the Islamic reference about women, and saying that the women are in danger because they are starting to wear headscarves, as if, you know, the danger is the way you dress. And the liberation is the way you undress and remove the headscarf. This is so simplistic. The real question is, if you are serious about women empowerment, if you are serious about a society, is education. Tell us how many women and how women are educated in the country and how they can get access to the job market. This is the right factor. It's not the way they dress. And the point here, some are saying, yes, about women, and I remember someone from the New Statesman in the UK was saying, you don't really care about women. If you were caring about women, where were you under Mubarak? Mubarak didn't care about women. So you care about women when now we are talking about democratization in the country, and you don't care about women in Saudi Arabia when your interests are protected. So let us come to the true question. Which kind of education, which policy, which educational project do we have for the country? Because at the end of the day, there will be no democratization if there is no education and popular education. And I don't see this coming in a strong way from the two poles in the discussion between secularists and Islamists. This is a very important factor. The second one is, of course, as we were saying, the economic dimension. Which kind of economy and economic project? Look at something which is very dangerous in the whole process. Tunisians are only for Tunisia. Egyptians are for Egypt. And the South-South relationship, the regional factor, the regional dimension, understanding that you are not going to get it alone. It's not possible for Egypt to succeed alone. You need to have South-South and to shift your relationship and to get, to use the multipolar economic order that we have now, not to idealize China, but to use China, to use India, to use the other forces, and then to get relationship between the countries. The problem is that the Arabs don't trust each other. They are more at ease dealing with Washington, dealing with London, or it's easier for them to deal with the other capitals than to deal to get something which is South-South relationship. It's an important challenge here, is in which way you are going to change this and to have something which is a new vision, a new economic vision. And there is one country which is quite interesting on this, is Turkey. Turkey opened now between 35 to 40 embassies in the south, in Africa. They are heading towards south and east in their new economic relationship, saying and trying to open up new channels for rebalancing their economic dependency and independence. So this is something that is part of the challenge for the Middle East. And the last one that we are not really very much talking about is the cultural dimension. And the cultural dimension is really to get it, to take it very seriously. It has to do with language, it has to do with national creativity, it has to do with what these countries are doing to celebrate their culture and to make it something which is positive. We need not only when it comes to democracy to speak about social justice, which is very important, but also about well-being within the society. And there is a very deep crisis when it comes to culture. Arabic language is now poor. Books are not read, not published, not translated. You can't get this level or this lack of level of interest to culture. Culture is important. And if you want to resist world culture, which is another way to speak about westernization, you need to celebrate your own culture in a positive way. And I think that this is so important. You know this, by the way, in Singapore, it's one of your challenges as well. Anyway, but you know that if you are serious with your own culture, you have to think about it. Well, everyone. If we want a diversity within the world, instead of taking from the West and to say, okay, we are happy with this world culture, celebrate the local, national, regional culture. And this is something which is feeling good with the culture, feeling good with the language. And this is missing in the discourse that we have, the political discourse that we have today in the Arab world, in the Middle East. So culture, it's important, education, it's important, the economic factors are very important. These are challenges that we need to talk about. Add to this the discussion about the state, the institutions, and in which way this has to be evolving. Today, I cannot predict anything, positive or negative, in the region. The only thing that I see is that there is a will, there is a movement that can help to change. And they are changing at least their minds and their understanding that they can have this power to change the political structures and the political status quo in the region and to reassess this. This is what I see. As to today, I can't say that something has succeeded. I'm still very, very cautious, but I want to be part of this movement of thought, helping the people say it's possible to be positive and not to fall into something which is everything is under control, it's controlled from abroad, and nothing can be done by the people. I think that this is the wrong answer to some of the questions I raised at the beginning. Thank you.